Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Yo antaha pravishya mama vacha imam prashuptam sanjeevayati akhila shakti darasvadamna अन्यांश्च हस्तचरणश्रवणत्वगादीन् प्राणान् नमो भगवते पुरुषाय तुभ्यम् लसतु श्रीमदानन्दतीर्थेन्दुर्नो हृदम्बरे यद्वचश्चन्द्रिका स्वान्तसन्तापं विनिकृन्तति पदवाक्यप्रमाणज्ञान् प्रणम्य शिरसा गुरून् व्याकरिष्ये यथाभूतं विष्णुतत्त्वविनिर्णयम्. So good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to friends who have joined for the 35th session on Kata Upanishad, which, as you all know, is part of the Krishna Yajur Veda. So the Rishi for Kata Upanishad is Kata Rishi, Yama, Chaturmukha Brahma, and Narayana himself. The Rishi Devata is Vamana Namaka Paramatma, and Chandas is Anushtup Chandas. So we invoke this, we pray to God before we start today's session, and we close Katha Upanishad today. So what did we do last week? So last week, the very last verse was Asti iti eva upalabdhavyaha tattvabhavena cha ubayoho. Asti iti eva upalabdhasya tattvabhavaha prasidati. So these are carefully, picked up words by Yama, and we have kind of dissected this in great detail last week. So today we have 1, 2, 3, 4 verses of Katha Upanishad, and then you have one verse which talks to you about what conversation happened between Yama and Nachiketa, and what eventually happened to Nachiketa. That is the next verse. And finally, we close the session by the Shanti mantra, which I recited just a minute ago. Okay. So what was the main discussion of last week? So last week we discussed about how the word asti came up again and again in the last 2 verses. 3 times Yama has used the word asti. Yeah. And then we understood asti means what? The very first requirement for philosophical progress is we know the Supreme as asti, that he is there, he is there. Having that faith and shraddha becomes the very first step in philosophical progress. So let us contemplate on this Brahman as asti, that he is there. And the next immediate contemplation is contemplate this Brahman as a supreme Lord who is way above anything that you and I know about either ourselves or this universe. So he is a supreme being. He is in an entirely different category, as chapter 15 of Gita tells us. So in that sense, asti means what? A plus ta plus e. A stands for adhika. E stands for knowledge. St is a shortened version of sat. Sat is that which exists. Swatantram aswatantram cha dvividam tattvam ishyate swatantro Bhagavan Vishnu. So this is the very first step in philosophical progress. If we take the wrong step in our philosophical progress, we are bound to land up in great trouble. So Yama here says, first think he is asti, then think also that he is asti. When you make that progress, that is, when you know him as asti, asti iti eva upalabdhasya tattva bhavaha prasidati. So when you know and you do your philosophical journey that this Supreme Brahman is the highest and he is the supreme most, and when you have this knowledge and you run your course of life and you run all your sadhanas with that spirit, then eventually tattva bhavaha, that is the Supreme Brahman, prasidati. He is pleased with you. So that is, he is now shedding his divine grace upon you. When he is pleased means that he is shedding some grace upon us. Okay, so the next question that comes is, we are all doing our own philosophical journey. This is not a sprint. We know this is a marathon, and each person is in a different pace and they are trying to reach the destination here. So when we are on this journey, how do we know that we are being subjected to divine grace? Okay, that is a question. Yeah, it's a fair enough question that for us to ask about. How do we know that we are being subjected to divine grace? Yama says here, Yada sarve pramuchyante kamaha ye asya hridi shritaha ata martyo amruto bhavati atra brahma sam ashnute. So clear words. So let's repeat that again. Yada sarve pramuchyante kamaha ye asya hridi shritaha ata martyo amruto bhavati atra brahma sam ashnute. So you split this open, so it makes a lot of sense. So when do we know that we are having some grace, that there is some divine grace that is being shed upon us? We will know this yada, when sarve pramuchyante kamaha, when we realize that we are no longer have the desires for material gains. That when we know that all our material desires are gone or dwindling down, then we know that there is this divine grace that is being shed upon us. Okay, so that is a clue. When you feel at this point of time, either to go to Cineworld cinema or do you want to come to a satsang, and when you make a decision that you don't want to go to a cinema but you want to do a satsang, then you know, yes, you made a conscious decision, but for you to make that conscious decision, there has also been a grace, a divine grace that has been shed upon you. So yada sarve pramuchyante kamaha. Yeah. So this is important because we know the four purusharthas, right? Dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. So dharma and artha and kama is all operating in the mundane world. And then, of course, the highest purushartha is the moksha or the liberation. So when we are doing these transactions in the material life, when we are doing things properly, dharma, and by doing it properly, we are gaining artha, properties and possessions. And we are doing these two, that is doing things in a proper way, honest way, and gaining material wealth, etc. We are doing it with some desires. After all, if you don't have any desires, you are not a sentient being at all. Having desires is a fundamental nature of a sentient being. So what you need to understand here is, Yama is not completely saying that all your desires are gone. No. Sentient beings always have a desire. For example, a sattvika jiva will have a desire for jnana, will have a desire for bhakti, will have a desire for vairagya. Whereas a rajasic and a tamasic jiva will have a desire for experiencing sense objects, assuming they are giving us pleasure. That leads to kama, krodha, and lobha. Okay. So what Yama is clearly telling us here is, when yada sarve pramuchyante material kamaha. So where do these material kamas reside? Ye asya hridi shritaha. Shritaha means ashritaha. Where are they? Hridi. Hridi means the material mind. Okay, so in last week or the week before, we were talking about mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayoho. So our mind is responsible for our attachment. Mind is also responsible for our detachment and liberation. So this material desires, the primary seed of material desires is based, is in the material mind. And one of the meanings for hridi should not be confused with hrit. Hrit is middle portion of the body, which is the heart, where the thymus is, where the jiva is. So that is called hrit. Hridi means where the mind is. Okay, so what is that mind? So we know that the jiva is in the middle portion of the body. The jiva is always covered with the linga sharira. So the material mind in that sense actually is in the linga sharira, okay, fundamentally. So where those material kamas, our desires are there in the material covering of the soul. Yeah. Ye asya hridi shritaha. So when these material things are gone, atha, then martyoho amruto bhavati. So then what happens when that material things are gone? Yama says that you will reach your destination, you will reach amruta, you will become, this martyo, this mortal body of yours will no longer, you will never acquire bodies again, and you become an amruta bhavati. Okay, so yada sarve pramuchyante kamaha ye asya hridi shritaha ata martyoho amruto bhavati. Okay, so here it is useful to remind ourselves of this beautiful verse, chapter 2, 62-63. So who wants to go for it? Who wants to recite this, please? 62-63. Shilaji, I can see you in the picture.
Sorry, Vijay. Okay, Mataji. Thank you. ध्यायतो विषयान् पुंसः सङ्घस्तेषूपजायते सङ्गात् सञ्जायते कामः कामात् क्रोधोऽभिजायते क्रोधात् भवति सम्मोहः सम्मोहात् स्मृतिविभ्रमः स्मृतिभ्रंशात् बुद्धिनाशो बुद्धिनाशात् प्रणश्यति.
Wonderful, Shilaji. So yeah, so we know how this whole desire, kama, krodha, the sequence that comes from these two critical verses in chapter 2, 62 and 63. But that happens only when you start thinking about material objects. But when you start thinking about the Paramatma, the desire for jnana, bhakti and vairagya, that desire, and then you bring Paramatma in the equation, you take an entirely different path and you reach jnana, bhakti, vairagya. Okay, and it is only when you reach this, then ataha martyoho amruto bhavati. Okay, so that is what the next verse is. Yatra Brahma sam ashnute. So this Brahma there means Purna, right? Brahma means Purna, that which is full. So you attain that which is full, which is Paramatma, and that which is full, which is of eternal and infinite bliss. And you also attain your own fullness, in the sense, as per your capacity, you also attain your fullness. There, when in association, Brahman. So there, where in Vaikunta, you become associated with Brahman. Okay. So yada sarve pramuchyante kamaha ye asya hridi shritaha ata martyoho amruto bhavati atra Brahma samashnute. So easy verse. So then Yama again reminds, because this is foundational for philosophical progress. What is the root cause of our material desires then? Kama, what is the root cause? Yada sarve prabidhyante hridayasya iha grantabhyaha ata martyo amruto bhavati yetavad eva anushasanam. So there is a slight twist here. So yetavad Anusashanam, we'll come to that at the end. But let's look at this. So Yama is again reminding us, Yada sarve prabhidyante hridi yasya grantayaha. Grantas means knots. Yeah. So knots of what? Knots of ignorance. And where is our knots of ignorance? As I told you, our knots of ignorance is primarily in our linga sharira. So again, we've had a session, a lot of neurobiology discussion about ignorance, and we've said that ignorance is not just the absence of knowledge. Ignorance is a positive entity. Ignorance is positive nescience. It is a positive thing. It is a positive thing that exists on the linga sharira. And here Yama calls that as grantayaha, knots. Okay. Yada sarve prabidhyante. Prabidhyante means when these knots of ignorance are untied. Prabidhyante means are removed or untied. Yada sarve, when all ignorance, hridayasya iha grantayaha. Where is that? In the linga sharira of the jivas. Yeah. When that knot is untied, then only the ignorance goes. Because the ignorance is what? That leads to kama. And the kama leads to krodha, and lobha, mada, matsara, and etc. Okay. So that ignorance is the foundational problem here. And that ignorance can be removed only through knowledge. And when you remove that ignorance, then your material karmas go away. Yeah. And then you start making that proper direction. So remember, just a quick reminder here, in this section, what Yama is telling us is, in the previous sections, he has discussed a lot about who this Brahman is, what is our relationship with him, and etc. So he has given us a lot of knowledge. Okay. Now here he is giving us what is called as the upaya, the means, and how do you achieve this knowledge. So he has spoken about ignorance, he's spoken about desires, and again he's spoken about how you need to follow the path of Shreyas, then how you get aparoksha jnana and so on. So I just want to remind you about the prakarana or the contextual relevance here. So Yama then places the fundamental problem for all of us is ignorance, and it is this knot that leads us to desire, and the only way of progress is to remove this ignorance or the knots. And there are various types of ignorance, right? And we have done this in previous sessions. So I would request you to go back and have a look at this. Paramachadika, Jivachadika, and sense of independence and identifying with the material body. So this is a quick quiz. So who wants to remind us all what is Paramachadika and what is Jivachadika as per Shastra? Anybody wants to answer that? Okay, no problem. So Paramachadika, sorry, who was that? Suresh, go for it.
Yeah, Jivachadika is the curtain which which prevents us from seeing our own Swarupa, and Paramachadika is the one that one has to transgress. I mean, that is the one which is covering the Paramatma's vision.
Yeah, beautiful, Suresh. But also, I mean, the other ignorance, of course, is sense of independence and identifying with the material body. And that is the reason why we are going through endless cycles of samsara. So that sense of independence and identifying with the material body comes to some extent, it's a consequence of our Bhavarupa Jnana or Jivachadika as it's called. Okay, so once we have this kind of an idea of once we know this is the position that we are in. So this is our position at this point. Once we know that, then Yama here, what he is saying is, once you know that, and once you had, as Suresh ji said, the Paramachadika, that curtain is removed, and you have the vision of the Supreme. And that is what we did in 2 weeks ago, right? Where he took about examples of aparoksha jnana, various types. Something like, you see somebody in the mirror, or somebody as a reflection in the water, or somebody who has a very clear vision. So there are grades of aparoksha jnana that we discussed. So Sheila ji, Manjunath ji has raised hands.
Yeah, I had a doubt, Madhuji. This Jivachadika and Paramachadika, is it like Avarana or Vikshepa?
Avarana, yeah. So it's a covering. Yes, correct.
Yeah.
It's a covering. Yeah, it's a covering of ignorance, and that covering of the ignorance is on the linga sharira.
Yeah.
Of the jiva. Yeah. So the coming back to this. So now there is a key concept that Krishna talks about this in when he talks about dhyana yoga and all that. He talks about this quite a lot about what is paroksha jnana and what is aparoksha jnana. Okay, so we need to make a differentiation here, because what Yama has said is, all your scriptural studies, all the satsangs and whatever discussion, shravana, manana, nitidhyasana that you want to do, all that is only up to the point of the vision of the Supreme. And Yama says, once you reach that point and you're crossed over beyond that point, all this readings of scriptures and so on, you don't need it. In the sense that doesn't mean you close the book and walk away. No, he says, your Jiva Swarupa itself is then inherently experiencing that light, and you don't need an help of an external medium. So that is what is Paroksha Jnana. Paroksha Jnana means that knowledge of the Supreme that we get through external means, i.e. we use our external indriyas, read scriptures and assimilate some ideas about Brahman, etc. So that knowledge that we get is called Paroksha Jnana. And once we get the divine grace and we've had a vision of the Supreme, then that becomes your self-realization, and the self itself experiences that knowledge of the Supreme. That knowledge, experience of the knowledge of the self of the Supreme is very individual. Your experience of knowledge of Supreme will be different from my experience of the knowledge of Supreme. Yeah, so that is an interesting distinction that Yama makes here. Harish.
Yeah, one question. Is one necessary for the other? I mean, do you need paroksha jnana to get aparoksha jnana?
Yeah, good question. So you that is what the scriptures tell us, Harish ji. So we can't just go to a forest under a tree and start meditating. The problem there is, what is it that we are going to meditate upon? We need to meditate upon something, isn't it? And that is what Yama has said in the previous verse. Asti iti eva upalabdhavyaha. So you need to meditate upon him or as somebody. Yeah. And how do you get that knowledge as to what is it that you're going to meditate upon? You need to have some kind of an introduction to this, some kind of a key. So that key is the paroksha jnana. And once you cross over to the aparoksha jnana, Yama says, yetavad anusashanam. Yeah, only up to this point, you have yetavat anusashanam. Anusashanam means scriptural study, vidhi, vidana, niseja, etc. required only until we get aparoksha jnana. Okay. So, Harish, to answer your question, some folks, because they have journeyed through eternal cycles of life and they've made so much sadhanas, and when we see them in this birth, so they don't have to read any shastras, but they are straight away gone into dhyana, and then they reach aparoksha jnana. That is because they have actually spent millions of births before doing that sadhana to reach to that point. Yeah, so that is how you take that for that person. But for you and I, we need to start somewhere, and for us that paroksha jnana is very important, that knowledge that we assimilate through the scriptures. And once you do that, then you get jnana, bhakti and vairagya. And once you get the jnana, bhakti, vairagya, and you actually practice proper devotional service, then the Shastra says that at that point, when you do that, you will get grace. Even when you do dhyana, you don't do dhyana in empty space. You need to keep this Supreme Being as your focal point, and then you express your devotion in that dhyana, then the grace comes in. Okay. So Yama says that, yes, this is the journey of souls, that you do paroksha jnana, then you reach aparoksha jnana. When you reach aparoksha jnana, you don't necessarily need all the scriptures, because the soul itself is then aware of its own experience of the Supreme. Okay. So now Yama is giving us a very deep philosophical idea here. Okay. So when you reach that point, yeah, so this is only few. So there are only very few people who reach this point that we can see. It is very likely that they have actually spent, as I said, millions of births before to reach that point. But Yama says, for those who have reached that point, what happens to their souls? Yeah, so as you know, the jiva is in, we have come to that a little bit. Oh, I've got it here. And also I've got it in the subsequent slides. We know the jiva is in the middle portion of the body, right? So what happens to the jiva? When, for example, when we die, what happens to the jiva? How does the jiva goes out of the body? This is a fundamental question. Yeah. And there are different routes in this body that the jiva can exit. After all, in Kata Upanishad, Yama has said, Puram eka dasha dwaram ajasya avakra chetasaha anushtaya na shochati vimuktascha vimuchyate etadvai tat. This body of 11 gates, Krishna has said the body of 9 gates. Yeah. So the body can decide, the jiva can decide to exit from any of these gates. Not only these gates, there are so many nadis, or what our Shastras talk about, energy centers and energy paths, energy networks. So the jiva from the middle portion of the body, when it has to exit, it can exit through various nadis. It can exit through the various dwaras that is there in the body. So here Yama says, you know, that person who has achieved that exalted state of aparoksha jnana and has finished, in the sense that, as you know, when you have the aparoksha jnana, there is what is called as a karma kshaya that happens due to divine grace. So all the karmic imprints are disappeared. And whatever prarabdha karma that you have experienced. And you are in that very last birth. So in that very last birth, what happens? That is what is Yama talking about. Here he says, Shatam Shatam cha eka cha hridayasya nadyaha tasam murdanam abhinis sruta ekaha tayor urdvam ayan amrutatvameti vishwang anya utkramane bhavanti. Okay, clear words. In a nutshell, what Krishna explains in great detail in Dhyana Yoga, here Yama gives in a one verse. So he has now compressed the various nadis of the body into Shatam means what? 100. Eka means 1. So he reduces the number of important nadis to 50 on the right side, 50 on the left side, and 1 nadi on the top of your head. Okay? And of course, the same Yama has also spoken to us in the first Adhyaya, second Valli, when we were doing the second Vara, the Nachiketa, Agni, and so on. We were also looking at 36,000 nadis on the right, 36,000 nadis on the left, 72,000 nadis together. And here Yama focuses on, from the heart emanates 101 primary nadis. Okay, for those of you interested in this, you can do your detailed studies, but I'm just giving you an overview here. So we know there are 3 energy roots, isn't it? Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna. And the top end of the Sushumna is called the Sushumna Nadi. Okay? The Sushumna Nadi is also called Sahasrara. So Sahasrara is also called Brahmanadi. So you need to have these synonyms in your head, because when you see it in yoga text and all that, you will find these names: Sushumna Nadi, Brahmanadi, Sahasrara. Okay, they are all the same. They're talking about this top of the head, that is the top end of the Sushumna Nadi is called Sahasrara, which corresponds to the 11th opening that Yama has discussed before in the second Adhyaya. That is the anterior fontanelle in the babies that you feel in newborns. That is the Sahasrara. So he is taking this now and he says that, so there are 101 nadis. But this jiva that has obtained the aparoksha jnana and has finished all the innings in this material world now needs to exit from its final body onto Satyaloka and from there to Vaikuntha. What happens to that? So really interesting. So what happens to that? So Yama says, Tasam Murdanam Abhinisrita Ekaha. Okay. There is one nadi in the top of the head, Murdanam. Okay. Abhinisrita Ekaha. So this nadi, he exits through this nadi. So if that jiva who has attained aparoksha jnana exits through this nadi, tayor urdvam ayam amrutatvameti. So when that exits through that nadi, that jiva then never returns and it experiences eternal bliss eventually. Okay. Whereas all of us who are currently going through this material innings at this point, Vishwang Anya Utkramane Bhavati. So all other jivas will exit through some other nadi or some other opening, and then when they do that, they come back to the material world. So that is the view that Yama is telling us actually what happens to the jivas. Yeah, it's a very important idea of Hindu philosophy or Vedic philosophy as to what happens to the jiva. Not many world philosophies actually talk about the journey of souls in this great detail. I've got another slide coming up talking about this. Yeah, so it has to be your very last birth when you have done all the sadhanas. And of course, Krishna in Dhyana Yoga has also said that these yogas, through their yoga siddhi, they are able to sit in deep meditation and they are able to lift up, and the jiva goes through initially from Anahata Chakra, it goes to the Vishuddha Chakra, it goes through Agnya Chakra, and then it goes to Sahasrara, and then it exits and goes to Brahman. And Krishna talks about this, right? So Anahata Chakra. So what is the endocrine organ related to Anahata Chakra? Who wants to answer that? Any answer? Thymus, very good. And what about Vishuddha Chakra? What does that correspond to?
Thyroid.
Thyroid, very good. And what about the Agnya Chakra? What does that correspond to?
Pituitary.
Pineal.
Pineal gland. Thanks, Netaji. And then you go out through the Sahasrara Chakra. So thymus, thyroid, pineal gland, and out you go through the exit. So that is the onward journey of souls. Yeah. So here there are two ideas here. So when you think about some siddha, some yoga siddha, somebody who's so elevated in yoga, in meditation, they are able to at will make this exit. Okay, and they're able to do that, and we've heard of so many great Paramahamsas who have done that, and they have done that because they have reached that stage of their life where they have done lots of sadhanas before, and they are able to do this. And for those who have attained aparoksha jnana, of course, this becomes a spontaneous thing. When they finish all their prarabdha karmas, they exit through that. Okay, so two paths. So ultimately, all of us as souls, like how when we have our material body and we are riding this chariot, there are only two routes we can take. One is Shreyas, one is Preyas. Similarly, for the soul, when it takes that journey, it takes only two routes. It's very interesting how the Vedic philosophy is so consistent. And it says there are only two routes, mate. One is Urdhva and any other Nadi is others. Okay. So what is that? Okay, the journey of souls in two routes. Okay, and this I hope one or two of you will be able to, one or two or three of you will be able to recite this verse, because these are beautiful ideas of chapter 8 of Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna talks to Arjuna about the journey of souls and the two routes that they take. So who wants to start off? Tell us about 8.5 and 8.12, please.
Shall I start, Mother?
Yeah, and then maybe, go for it.
It's to recite and explain, isn't it?
Yeah, please, yeah.
Antakale cha mameva smaran muktva kalevaran yah prayati samadbhavam yati nastyatra samshayah sarvadvarani samyamya मनोहृदि निरुद्य च मूर्ध्याधायात्मनः प्राणमास्थितो योगधारणम्. Antakale cha mameva means in the time of death, whoever remembers me at the time of death, he will attain madbhavam, that is my abode. There is no doubt about that. Sarvadvarani samyama is, I think, what you have just mentioned, that all the roots, I mean chakras, if you control them, and mind and heart as well, then you go above that when the prana mastito yoga dharanam. You will have that attainment of yoga, and prana will attain God, I think. No.
Thank you.
I'm thinking about the meaning, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sheilaji. Yeah, very beautifully captured. And who wants to take up 8.26?
Okay.
I had somebody. Yeah.
Yeah, Neeta here. Okay. It is Shukla Krishne Gati Hete Jagata Shashwate Mate Ekayatyana Tana Vrittim Anyaya Vartate Punaha. I think he has explained, Krishna has explained two paths in the about two shlokas, 24 and 25. The Agni Jyotir Shukla. So the one path of light and the other one of the darkness, of the deities that will take the jiva through these two different paths. So if you know these two different paths exist, then you are not going to come back into life. Or that is what is explained in this shloka.
Thank you, Neetaji. Again, exactly the same ideas or philosophy that Yama is talking about is being elaborated further by Krishna to Arjuna. Yeah. So Krishna basically, what are the two gatis or paths? Shukla and Krishna, the path of light and the path of darkness. So the path of light, we call it as Devayana, and the path of darkness, we call it as Pitruyana. And here, Krishna is given what is the route that they take. It's amazing stuff, but I think the deep philosophy is actually in the Vedas and the Upanishads. Krishna has given a summary of what is going on here to the souls. But if we need more information about this, we have to go to the Vedas and the Upanishads to understand this. So what is Devayana? He said, okay, when the soul is in that aparoksha jnana sthiti and it is in the final innings and he is making that exit, Krishna says, it makes an exit through a Shukla Gati. Shukla means the path of light. It goes through the path of light. How does that happen? Through the Sahasrara Nadi. It goes through that path of light. And what is that light? It goes through Agni, Jyoti, Ahaha, Shuklaha, Shanmasaha, Uttarayanam. Okay, so the deep philosophy is there is, it is talking about the various planetary systems and the Abhimani Devatas who are there in that planetary systems before it goes to Uttarayanam, the Chaturmukha Loka, and then after that it goes to Vaikunta, as Neetaji mentioned. Whereas those of us who don't go through that first, that among the 101, the topmost nadi, but we use the other 50 on the right side and the 50 on the left side, or the 36,000 on this side and the 36,000 on the other side. What happens to us is we go through the lokas of Duma, Ratrihi, Krishnaha, Shanmasaha, Dakshinayanam. These are all areas of Swarga. Okay, for those punya jivas who have collected punyas, they go through these areas in the Swargaloka. And then once they've exhausted their punyas, then they follow down, they come down. They come through Chandramasam, then they come through cloud, rain, plant, male body, female womb, and then born again. Okay, so that is what the journey of souls that we have done so many times. Okay, now here is my very basic question. Yeah, so let us think about us as souls. Currently, we got a sadhana sharira. We got two legs, Upendra and Shambhu. That is our Indra's two children. They are controlling the right leg and the left leg, Upendra and Shambhu. Okay, so these guys are there. We got a gross body. We are walking, we are running, we are jumping, etc. But when the soul leaves, it leaves without a gross body. So the basic question is, how does the soul then move? Yeah, it has to move, right? How will it move? Will it just float in thin air, or how does it move? How does the soul travel if it does not have a gross body? I think we need to think about this problem, because our Vedic philosophy has got a solution for this. It has given an explanation, in contrast to various other philosophies that I am aware of. And it goes on to talk about how does the soul move? If it goes up means what? Who carries it? Who does it? So who wants to come here and talk to us? I've got some clues here, and we have discussed that before. So how does that soul move? How does that soul move when it does not have a gross body? So what is the view here?
Not sure. Oh, okay. Hello.
Suresh, go for it. And then Neeta.
I mean, sorry, Madhu, does the soul needs anything to move in the first place? Because it is a non-matter, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's a good point, Sudarshan. But the basic question is, I'm just giving you an analogy of, if we have a material body, we use our legs and move. And if the soul is an entity, how will it move then? So so give me an answer. It is non-material, but even if it is non-material, it needs to move, right? If you are saying it travels to Swargaloka and then it comes down, how does it do that? That is what I'm asking. If it is subatomic, right? So our jiva, you and I, we are subatomic things. How do we move up and down? What is the Vedic view on this? Do the jivas have a leg? Do they have a non-material leg and they run about? Or what is it? Yeah. So yes, I hope that my question is relevant here. So we got a few who have raised hand. So Kavita is saying Lord Shiva. So Kavita, do you want to explain what that means, please? Okay, so Suresh, do you want to go? Do you want to answer that? You had something to, you had some ideas there.
No, Madhu, I was just wondering if, depending on the destination on which route the soul leaves the body, it is the respective Abhimani Devatas which direct the soul in a particular direction and to wherever they need to lodge. And then perhaps at the time of Pralaya, it's Chaturmukha who takes the Moksha Jivis up, and it's Vayu who takes the rest of them to be hibernated again, I suppose.
Okay, so you captured I would say 80% of the ideas and concepts, Suresh. Neeta, did you have something to say? Neeta or Shrut?
Yeah, I think this is where you've given a bit of clue. There is a Vayu Vahana. So what it is described, I think it's the Balita Sutta that you had mentioned before, is that Vayu takes the Jiva and Paramatma together out of the body, and that is how it leaves the body and is carried away. Again, it's just that it is described one shoulder is left. I think this is one Jiva and another one Paramatma, because Paramatma is also there as part of the Jiva. And I think in Bhagavad Gita also it comes Vayur Gandha Nivashyat. So it's like that the Jiva goes out.
Vayur Gandha Nivashyat. Yeah, beautiful, Neetaji. Anybody else? Anybody else wants to say? Jiva always does karma deval. She has mentioned this idea. Okay, fine. So I think this is an interesting idea. So we need to think about how does the Jiva move when it does not have a gross body. So let us not forget that inside the Jiva is the Antaryamin. And there are certain schools of philosophy that think that inside the Jiva is also the Prana Tattva, and inside the Prana Tattva is the Antaryamin. So the evidence for all that comes in the Upanishad. So I've got this Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. We've discussed this before. Tad yata Mashika, Makshika, Madhukara Raja, Anu Utkramantam, Sarva Eva Utkramante. So this is example of a honey, the beehive, where, they have these discussions about various Abhimani Devatas, who is superior, who is inferior, and so on. In that you have, when a Madhukara Raja leaves the beehive, all other slave bees follow it. And when the Madhukara Raja, that is the queen bee, now we call it, but the head of the bees, comes back to the beehive, all others come back. So the all other bees are the Abhimani Devatas, and this main bee is the Prana Tattva. That is where the discussion in the Upanishad is. So that is what is happening here. And this explanation, Vayu Vahanaha in Vishnu Sahasranama is very beautiful, where Hanumanta carries Rama in one shoulder and Lakshmana in the other shoulder in Ramayana. So that is a very pictorial, metaphorical example of deep philosophy here, where this Prana Tattva has the Paramatma on the right shoulder and he carries the Jiva in the left shoulder. Based on whatever the karmic imprints or lack or no karmic imprints of the Jiva, this Prana Tattva, upon the instruction of the Paramatma, starts moving the Jiva up or down. So if it goes through the Sahasrara Nadi, this Prana Tattva takes this Jiva all the way through this route, Agni, Jyoti, Ahaha, Shuklaha, Shanmasaha, Uttarayanam. And if the Jiva is not doing big deals, then it takes them to this route, Dhuma, Ratrihi, Krishnaha, Shanmasaha, Dakshinayanam, and then brings them back down to the material world. Okay, so this is how the Vedic philosophy evolves, that the Jivas, when they leave the body, they are not directionless and they are not floating in thin air. The Vedic philosophy tells that there are the sentient aspects within the Jiva, largely directed by the Sat. When Sat decides to leave, Prana leaves. When Prana leaves, the Jiva leaves. That is how the process of death happens, and the process of Jiva, the process of journey of souls happens, is the Vedic view there. So I hope you find that interesting, because the next one is even more fascinating. What Yama is actually telling us. This is the very last verse of Yama in Kata Upanishad. So clearly that very last verse of Yama has to be the most poignant and most important verse of Kata Upanishad, and understandably it is. So what does it say? Angushta matraha purushaha antaratma sada jananam hrudaye sannivishtaha tam swat sharirat pravruhet munjan ishikam Dhairyena tam vidyat shukram amrutam tam vidyat shukram amrutam iti. And he finishes off the Kataka Upanishad. So let's look at the first half of this verse. Angushta matraha purushaha antaratma sada jananam hrudaye sannivishtaha. Angushta matra means the size of your thumb. Yeah. And again, Katha Upanishad, Yama has said the same verses before. It may be familiar to you. Angushta matraha purusho madhye atmani tishtati. Ishanam bhutabhavyasa natato vijugupsate etadvaitati. He said, he who knows that there is this Angushta matraha purushaha who is right in the middle portion of the body, that fellow will never hide anything, or he'll try to hide himself from anything, because he knows that the Supreme Brahman is always protecting him. That is the meaning of that verse, right? So there also Angushta matraha purushaha comes. Yeah, here also Angushta matraha purushaha. So we need to understand the basic. This is hardcore fundamental Vedic philosophy. Always a good idea to revise. So what is it Yama is reminding us here? So let us think about ourselves as a jiva. So we are in the middle portion of the body, which is this yellow blob. And inside us is the Paramatma, which is the red blob. The Jivatma is covered by the gross body, that is this cartoon. So this gross body is called Sharira. Yeah, no confusion there. So this gross body is called Sharira. Now inside the Sharira is us as Jivas. We are called Shariri or Pratyagatma. Yeah? And inside the Shariri is the Shariraka. And the Shariraka is called Paramatma. And that is the reason why, and I've told you before, Brahma Sutra or Vedanta Sutra is also called Shariraka Sutra. Yeah, Brahma Mimamsa Shastra or Shariraka Sutras. Shariraka Sutras means these are the sutras that talk about the Paramatma. That is why it is called Shariraka Sutra. So Sharira, Shariri, and Shariraka. Shariri is Pratyagatma, Shariraka is Paramatma. So we need to understand this idea first. Once we know this, then this particular verse starts making some sense. Okay, so this jiva is inside this inverted lotus, isn't it? Prashna Upanishad, Taittiriya Upanishad, Dahara Vidya of Chandogya Upanishad, they all talk about this. Okay, now I put a new verse, chapter 1861, that also talks about the same idea. So who wants to recite 1861, please? Anybody wants to go for 1861? Another beautiful verse. Okay. Ishwaraha Sarva Bhutan. Sorry, somebody wants to recite that? Neeta, go for it. Yeah, you go for it.
Ishvara sarva bhutanam hridesherjunas tishtati brahmyan sarva bhutani yantrarudhani mayaya.
Yeah, again, beautiful. So, Ishwaraha Sarva Bhutanam, inside all the jivas, Hriddeshe, in the middle portion of the jivas, Arjuna, Tishtati, is there. Okay. And the next one is the chariot metaphor. Yeah. Brahmayan, it goes everywhere. This jiva with this gross body. Who? This is Sarva Bhutani. Yantra. Yantra is what? This chariot. Rudani, Maya. The yantra holds this chariot and it goes. And what is this chariot made up of? Maya. Maya means what? The Prakriti. So this body made of Prakriti. So it's beautiful verse. Again, Ishwaraha Sarva Bhutam Hriddeshe Arjuna Tishtati. So we need to understand this in various angles. The first thing is, if you look at the inverted lotus leaf or the thymus or the Hrit portion, which is where the Jiva is and the Paramatma is. Now, this material aspect is also pervaded by Brahman. Okay, so we have said that before, that this Paramatma is not just inside the Jiva. In your gross body also, he is everywhere. Okay, so that is a key concept. So who is going to tell us what is the difference between Atma and Antaratma when it comes to God's perspective? When we look at it from God's perspective, what does Atma mean? What does Antaratma mean? So who wants to take this one up?
Madhu, is Antaratma the portion of the God which is within the Jiva Swarupa, while Atma is the other bird that is sitting alongside the Swarupa, alongside the Jiva, or which pervades the rest of the Pindanda.
Yeah, thank you, Suresh. Yeah, perfectly right. So, Atma, look at the etymology of Atma. Atatat matrutvat. So, that is the Atma there. Tata matrutvat. Matrutvat means tanmatrutvat, means the material world, the Pindanda and the Brahmanda. That which pervades Pindanda and Brahmanda is called Atma. So, our Pindanda, that which pervades our Pindanda is called Atma. Okay. So, you could say, in one sense, for people who are in deep meditation, they do this dhyana of Paramatma as Angushta Matraha. That is one level. But the higher level here is what Yama is talking about. So this is the material body where Angushta Matraha in the middle portion of your heart. But Yama is asking you to think about something a little bit more subtle. In fact, very subtle, that the yoga siddhi, the siddhas are able to do that. What is that? He says, now think about your jiva, you as a soul, as a body. So you are the soul. So this yellow blob here, I've just expanded this into a cartoon. And I made this jiva. The jiva is non-material, as Sudarshan mentioned. So the jiva is non-material, but the Vedic philosophy says, you may not be able to know this now, but the jiva also has got a form. It has its eternal indriyas, it has its eternal hands, eternal legs, eternal eyes, nose, etc. So in that perspective, a subatomic jiva has a form, and that becomes the sharira of the Paramatma. So when you look at the jiva as a sharira now, Paramatma becomes the antaratma. Okay, so that is the antaratma. So you need to think about it in context. You need to ruminate on this. What is atma? What is antaratma? What is angushta matraha purushaha? So this is what Yama is saying here. This differentiation is very important, he says in the very next verse. Yeah, and we have done this, isn't it? Anoraniyan mahato mahiyan atma asya jantoho nihito guhayam. These words are very clear. That is talking about this. Anoraniyan. So he is smaller than the smallest. The smallest is the jiva, and he is inside that as Anoraniyan. Okay, but he is also in the whole of Brahmanda. But in Jantus means you and me, the jivas, nihitam guhayam, inside the jivas in their non-material middle portion. Okay, so that is the idea there of this Paramatma there. So that is how you do the dhyana in deep meditation, when you start making the journey upwards towards the Uttarayanam through the Sahasrara Chaksha, the Sahasrara Nadi. Yeah. So the next verse is very, very, very important in my perspective. So here what he says, tam swat sharirat pravrihet munjad iva ishikam dhairyena. So now you will understand what is it that I'm saying here and what is it that Yama is talking about. Okay. So we understood that the Jiva Swarupa is Sharira, or the body of the Antaryamin who is inside the Jiva. So now Yama says, he who is able to do this dhyana, tam, swat and sharirat. Swat, swa. What is swa? Swa is swatantra. Who is swatantra? Swatantro Bhagavan Vishnuhu. Okay. So it says swat and then sharirat. The sharira is the jiva, the swat is the Paramatma. Pravruhet, known as separate or distinct. So when you do the dhyana of swat, sharirat, pravruhet, and then Yama gives a beautiful example. He says, this meditation or dhyana of this asti, this great Brahman, is different from me. And that deep meditation is very important, but it is difficult. How to differentiate between me and the Paramatma, how the swat and sharirat needs to be differentiated. For that, Yama gives a very Vedic cultural thing. So, munjad iva ishikam. Okay, let's look at this. So, munja means, munja is a grass, munja grass. Okay, so in the Vedic times, you had various grasses that are used. Even now it is used. Our Purohits do this when we do Shraddha or any other function. You will notice that they give you some grass, you twist it around your ring finger and you put it, right? So this is what Yama is talking about. It's extremely interesting. So I'll give you the three grasses that we know in Vedic philosophy. There is kusha or darbe grass. And darbe is very common. We use in various rituals even now, darba grass. Yeah, that is called kusha. Then there is another type of grass called ishika. Ishika grass is called kasha. Okay, so there is the kusha and there is the kasha, and I was doing some Google searching this morning, and I found out that these grasses have got a proper botanical name: Desmos stachya bipinata and Saccharum spontaneum. Ishika grass and kusha grass. And Yama here is talking about munja. Okay, munja is a separate grass, and in fact there is a botanical name for it: Saccharum munja. Okay, munja grass. And here is some details for our benefit. Found along the river banks in India. It's a tall grass and grows up to 7 feet in height. Okay, so who is going to tell us here what is munji? So it's all related here. When I say munja, munji is another word that we use. What is munji?
Upanayanam.
Upanayanam. Very good. So what happens in Upanayanam? So in the ancient times, and also in some times, even in modern times, what you do is, you know, the thing that you put around the waist, when your son is getting Upanayanam, you put a small little, grass thingy around the waist when you do the munji. That thread is made of the munja grass. Okay, because it is made of munja grass, it is called munji. Okay, so Yama says in these kind of situations, when you're searching for the munji grass, so the munja grass, usually it looks very similar. Look at this, it looks very similar to Ishika grass. But what a specialist, a proper Vedic philosopher, what he will do is he'll be able to separate the munja grass from the Ishika grass, pick up the munja grass to do Upanayanam to his son. Okay. That is how your dhyana should be when you meditate on the Supreme, that munjad iva ishikam. Okay, very, very clear. Tam swad sharirat pravruhet. How do you separate and distinct? Exactly how you distinct the munja grass from the ishika grass when you are doing Upanyanam. Okay, why do you need to do this differentiation? Yeah, this is very, very important. When you pluck munja grass, one has to carefully separate it from the ishika grass. It is critical and essential in dhyana to similarly to separate J and B, is the Vedantic view. Yeah. Tam vidyad shukram amrutam. Tam vidyad shukram amrutamiti. This is the very last saying of Yama to Nachiketa. So you have to separate from munja and the ishika grass. Similarly, you separate from swat and sharirat. Swat is swatantra namaka paramatma. His sharira is this jiva. You need to separate that. Why? Remember, in this particular last line, things have repeated twice. Tam vidyad shukram amrutam. Tam vidyad shukram amrutam. And it says iti. So when twice it is repeated with the iti, then we know that the Upanishad is concluding at this point. And the very last verse of Yama is, this differentiation is fundamental and foundational to your journey. Yeah. Why? He says that swat is shukram and he is amrutam. And we have done this before. Shukram means shubram, means pure. Shukram means shoka rahita, means no suffering. Okay. That Supreme Paramatma, Bhagavanta, is always shukram. He is always pure, and that is why he is called Sat. And he is always nirdushta. Because he is nirdushta, he has no suffering. Okay. Whereas you and me, we are impure and we are full of suffering. And Yama is saying, make the distinction. Understand you are impure at this point and you're full of suffering. If you do dhyana on that Antaryamin, who is always pure and no suffering, then you will reach a state where you will become pure and you will not have any suffering. Similarly, that Brahman is Amrutam. plus Mruta, he is deathless. He has never had any associations with material things. And he is Amruta. He is eternally, infinitely blissful. So you are not at this point. You are going through cycles of death and birth, and you are constantly going through the cycles of death, and you are suffering. But if you think about your Antaryaman as Amrutam in your dhyana, and you exit, then you will become deathless and you become blissful. Okay, so this is the last verse of Yama, which categorically says this is how Yama's view is. Angushta matraha purusha antara atma. Sada jananam hrudaye sannivishtaha. This antaratma is in me always. Tam shvad sharirat pravurhet. Munjad iva ishikam dhairyena. With lots of discriminative power and strength, you have to do that. When you do that, you will understand he is Amrutam, he is Shukram, whereas you are not. But by doing that prayer and direction, you will eventually reach your Shukram state and your Amrutam state. So at this point, Yama says, Tam Vidyat Shukram Amrutam iti. And then he closes the Upanishad. The Upanishad finishes at this point. And Yama has given all the instructions that has to be given to any adhikari, any person who wants to make a philosophical journey. And he has given some key concepts today about the foundations of Vedantic philosophy. So the next verse, Kata Rishi says here, Mrutyur proktam Nachiketo atha labdva vidyam yetam yoga vidhimcha kritsnam. Okay, Brahma prapto virajo abhut Vimrutyuhu anyo api evam yo vidadat mameva. Let's read this again. Anyo api evam yo vid adhyatmam eva. So this is it's a very reassuring statement from Kata Rishi. He says, this was the conversation that happened. It actually started in December 2021, where Yama was talking to Nachiketa, and today Yama completes this discussion, says Kata Rishi, and he says, Mrutyuhu proktam. Mrutyuhu is Yama. Proktam means pra uktam. Uktam means he said. Had said about what? Pra. Pra means what? Para. Para is who? Narayana. Pratamam. Pra also stands for Pratamam. Pratamam means the very first time he gave this Katha Upanishad, talking about high philosophy, prakrishtam. So, Mrutyuhu proktam Nachiketaha. He spoke to Nachiketaha. What happened to Nachiketa over 14 months when he listened to this discussion with Yama? Atha labdva. Labdva is easy. Labdva means gained. What did he gain? He gained Atha. Atha means what? In fact, the very first sutra of Brahma Sutra is Atato Brahma Jignyasa. Ata is the very first verse of Brahma Sutra. What does that Ata means? Acharya says, Ata Shabdo Mangalarto Adhikara Anantarya Arthashcha. Ata Shabdaha Mangalarto. Who is the most Mangala? Who is the most auspicious? God himself. So, Nachiketo Atha Labdva. Atha is also a name of Brahman. A means Doshadura. Tha means Stita. Stita is what? As your Antaryamin. This Doshadura Antaryamin is called Atha. Atha is also Mangala Vachaka. Mangala Vachaka means who is the most auspicious, the supreme Brahman. So our friend Nachiketa, after listening to Yama, he attained or he gained Atha Labdva. Yeah. And also, how did this happen? Vidyam yetam. So what has our Guru Yama done over the last 14 months? Vidyam yetam, this knowledge. Yoga vidhim cha kritsnam. Kritsnam means all, in full, completely, comprehensively. Yama not only gave the knowledge, but also yoga vidhim. Yoga there, and as you know, yoga is so many meanings, isn't it? Yoga means stretching your body. Yoga means uniting. Yoga means if you have not had something, getting something is yoga. And also yoga means upaya. which is what all the chapters of Bhagavad Gita is. So yoga there means upaya, means of obtaining that knowledge. He not only gave the theoretical knowledge, but also the practical means of obtaining that knowledge. Vidyam yetam yoga vidim cha kritsnam. So after he gives what? Reaches Brahman, Brahma prapto. Who reached Brahma prapto? Nachiketa. Okay, how did he reach? Virajo. Raja means what? All the material things. Virajo means he shed all his material bodies, and eventually he'll cross the Viraja Nadi and then go to the other side. Amrutad. Yeah. Abhut. Vi mrutyuhu. Okay. This has to be vi here. Vi mrutyuhu means never have any births again. Remember the first vara here. So I'm going to pause here. What is the first vara? I know we're going to be doing it next week. First vara is what? Let me remind you. First vara is Nachiketa said, oh, my dad is always got a short temper. He's very angry. When I want to go back on earth and I want to do my sadhanas, when I go back to the same body, my dad should recognize me. He should be very happy with me. And also he should never become angry again. He should be nice to me. That is what the first vara was. So we need to think about that first vara. It's not just because he went to Yamaloka and then he had this conversation. From there, he just galloped to Satyaloka. No. Our friend Nachiketa has already asked, I want to go back and do my sadhanas on earth. So he did all the sadhanas and eventually he virajo vimrutyuhu. Okay, it all happened for Nachiketa. But for us who have sat here for 14 months, what is going to happen to us? So Yama says, Anyo api evam yo vid adhyatmameva. So for all of us who have actually listened to this conversation between Yama and Nachiketa, if we follow the principles that have been described in the Krishna Yajur Veda Kata Upanishad, we will also reach the same state as Nachiketa, and eventually we will reach our moksha. So again, we should all become that Nachiketa. So that is the overwhelming message of Kata Rishi, that I have seen this Upanishad, I've recited, I've told you this Upanishad, not because of that we spend a good time, but actually we all should strive to become Nachiketa. And when we do that, we will follow the same route as Nachiketa. After all, there is a route, okay? There is a destination. The destination is only one. Okay. And there is a route that is described in the Vedas. Nachiketa followed that route, so we will also follow that route. Now, to follow the Nachiketa's footstep, we pray. That is the Shanti mantra that over the last 14 months that every class we have said this. Sahana bhavatu, sahanau bunaktu, sahaviryam karavavahai, Tejasvina aditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So this gives us an opportunity to close today's session, actually to understand what is this. Okay, so this Shanti mantra of Krishna Yajur Veda actually is recited by the students. When they sit next to the Guru in a Gurukula, as the Guru walks in to give his lecture, all the students will start saying this, and the Guru will also join them, because he also has got a Guru, right? Everybody has got a Guru. So this Guru will also then recite Sahana Bhavatu. So what does that Saha now means? Both of us. Avatu, may this Antaryamin who is inside us protect us. May this Antaryamin get inside me and the Guru, i.e. meaning may he do things inside us so that we hear Shastras. Sahanau Bunaktu. So the Bunaktu there has got two meanings. One thing is, let this Supreme who is an Antaryamin inside us ensure that we do the proper karmas and that we have good, good life. Let him give us wealth, let him give us cows, let him give us food and shelter. Because without these three, without, what is that, makan, what is the three things that they say? What is it? Roti, kapada, and makan. So without roti, kapada, and makan, there is no shastra, okay? Fundamentals. You need to have the roti, kapada, and makan, and that is what sahanau bunaktu actually means. Give us roti, kapada, and makan. Give us good roti, kapada, and makan. and also protect us. Okay. And when we do our Shastras and give us the strength to do the Shastra, Sahaviryam Karavavahai. And when we do this, let us become enlightened. Let us that aura of knowledge glow in our face. Tejasvina vaditamastu. And the last one I think is very, very, very important. Ma vidvishavahai. Never do dvesha of each other. Let me and the Guru never have any misunderstanding. Let us not have dvesha against each other. But even more important for Sanatana Dharma is Ma vidvishavahai. Never do dvesha to any other philosophy or religion. Okay. Let us respect all religion. After all, the Shruti itself says Anadi Kalato Vrittaha Samayahi Pravahataha. The eternal religions have always flown eternally in these eternal cycles of creation and destruction. So let us not do dvesha to any other philosophy and religion. Let us not do dvesha to Guru and other Sishyas. Let us have enlightened knowledge. Why? When we do that, Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. So everything has a meaning here. Om is what? We know Om is, we have done it in Mandukya Upanishad. Om is the name of the Supreme. Akara, Ukara, and Makara. And that Om, that Paramatma is what? He's Shanti. What does Shanti mean? Again, Shanti means not peace. P-E-A-C-E. It is not that. Some people think it is P-E-A-A-C. I'm sorry, it is not that, because Shanti is an etymological word in Sanskrit. Shanti means Sha plus Anta plus E. Sha is Sham. Sham means bliss. E means Ingatau, knowledge. Anta means the end of knowledge and Jnanananda. So that Brahman is infinitely blissful and knowledgeable. That is why he is called Om. And we say 3 times Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi for so many reasons. I've just listed 3. He is all pervasive in Bhur Bhuvas Suvaha. He is there in the past, he is in the present, he is in the future. He is in the Rig Yajur Vedas, Rig Yajur and Sama. He is in Gadya, Padya and Gana aspect of the Vedas. They all praise only him. Therefore, Om Shantihi, Shantihi and Shantihi. And when we know this Paramatma as this, then we attain our state of Shantihi, Shantihi and Shantihi. Okay, so this is the Shanti mantra, where there are so many other important philosophies here, and the primary one is Ma Vidvishavahai, because we live in a very, very tumultuous times, very disturbed state of affairs. But our Vedic Sanatana Dharma always says, and we need to stick and hold on to that very carefully, Ma Vidvishavahai. Never do dvesha to other philosophies and religions and to other people. You respect everything. Everybody is in a path. Okay? And if you do that, Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. So with that, iti Katako Upanishadi Dvitiya Adhyayaha Tritiya Vallihi Krishna Pranamastu. So I am going to close today's session and I'm going to ask Neetaji to recite those beautiful verses in chapter 18, 67 to 71, please. Neetaji, over to you.
Okay. Idam te na tapaskaya na bhaktaya kadachana na cha shushrusave vachyam na cha mam yobhya suyati ya imam paramam guhyam mat bhakteshvabhidhasyati bhaktim mayi param kritva Mame vaishyatya samshayaha na cha tasman manushyeshu kaschinme priyakrittamaha bhavita na cha me tasmat anyah priyataro bhuvi adhyeshyate cha ya imam dharmyam samvadamavayoho jnana yajnena tenaham Ishtasyamiti me matihi Shraddhavananasuyascha Shrunuyadapi yo naraha Sopi mukta shubhan lokan Prapnapya प्राप्नुयात् पुण्यकर्मणाम्.
Wonderful. So on that note, Krishna Pranamastu, we close Kata Upanishad. I think the key message there is let's try to implement Kata Upanishad in our lives. And next week, we have designed a Kata Upanishad workshop just so that we spend next Sunday an hour and a half to try and have an interactive session on all the things that we have understood are the key messages of Katha Upanishad. So we got a fantastic list of participants. So I hope you will join us next week. So on that note, I'm going to close today's session. Krishna Pranamastu, and we can take any Q&As if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhu. World class lecture.
Thank you, Madhuji. That was really nice.
Excellent. So if there are no questions, then what we will do is next week we will do revision, and then the following week I think we should do Yagniya Mantro Upanishad, Isha Upanishad. It's an amazing Upanishad of 18 verses. I think over the last 3 years, we have built up the foundation and we built up all the basic understanding. So Isha Upanishad should flow, God willing, very nicely over 3 months or so. And then we will decide in summer what we need to do. It has to be another Upanishad, of course. Let's do Dasho Upanishad. And if we can finish our innings on earth with Dasho Upanishad, I think that'll be good. Okay. Great. So shall we?
Madhu, 1 minute. Can you hear me?
Yes, Sudarshan.
Yeah, wonderful lecture. Where does this Garuda Puranam and all, all those things stand in this, with this, whatever you taught today?
Yeah, very good question, Sudarshan. So Garuda Purana, Katha Upanishad, all these things are usually recited during the first 13 days after, if our beloved ones depart. Then Katha Upanishad is recited, Garuda Purana is recited, and also the Garuda Purana actually goes and talks about in some great detail, about this journey of souls, what happens to the Punya Jivas, what happens to the ones that commit various papas, and which kind of lokas they go to. And when Sasyamiva Martyaha Pachyate, Sasyamiva Jayate Punaha, when in that particular verse in the first Adhyaya, when Yamaduta says, look, these fellows are being fried in this Kumbi Paka and so on. So Garuda Purana talks about this in detail. It's fascinating philosophy. The idea there is not to scare us. The primary purpose of Garuda Purana is not to scare us, but actually to give us the Vedic view of what happens to the souls, so that at least we refrain from doing papas. So that is the view of Garuda Purana, but it is all related. So there's Garuda Purana, Katha Upanishad. First 13 days, it's all recited, as you know.
Thank you, Madhu. Thank you.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, I look forward to next Sunday. So let's have an excellent workshop. Please forward the invite to your friends and family, and hopefully they'll be inspired to join us for another Upanishad in 2 weeks' time. Okay, Krishna Pranamastu, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Thank you, Madhu.
Thank you, Madhu.
Thank you
Thank you very
very
much.
much.